Hey there and welcome to episode 27 of I'm Just Gonna Say It. Let me start off by apologizing for taking so long to upload this video, but I've been super busy last 2 months. I'm a freelance writer and also I've been meditating a lot. I've been just focusing on me these last 2 months, I guess, and didn't have time for videos. But I'm back again, better than ever. So in today's episode we'll discuss the Stargate project again. As I might have told you before, I'm actually in the board of directors of the Dutch Society for Psychical Research, and every year we host the day of parapsychology. And this year we had Ed May over. He was the leader of the Stargate project in the United States, together with the intelligence agencies in the Cold War era, where they used remote viewers to actually spy on the Russians. So here we go with episode number 27. So, the Stargate project. It was actually a program led by Stanford University, where they used remote viewers to actually spy on the Russians. And of course the intelligence agencies got very interested in this, so they joined in pretty quickly. And that program ran for years actually, and I got like $25 million subsidiation, I think. The program actually ran for like good number of years and got a lot of millions of dollars in subsidy. So it was a serious project. This year with the Day of Parapsychology conference, we had Ed May over. He actually ran the project, and he talked to us about his experiences and stuff like that. So, and of course we recorded the conference, so I'm going to share it with you. So here we go.
Thank you, Dick. I notice your Dutch is improving over the years. First, I have to apologize as being a monolinguist fellow from wherever I'm from, San Francisco. And I am literally, I'm not happy that I am sad. So if you won't mind, I'll give the rest of the presentation in Hungarian. Will that work? The other comment I would have on his introduction is, in statistics, you may have heard the English phrase, lies, damn lies in statistics. And that's all I'll say about his introduction. Okay, I have an interesting story to tell you. It will be relatively short, because I don't want to turn this into lots of charts and geeky things like equations and statistics. So let's get started. One thing you should have to know that if you don't want to read the slide, if you look often in the, hang on, let's screw that up, bear with me a sec. Let's see how to do this. I thought I had it on. Oh. Okay, forget it. Anyway, all you have to do is look at the upper right-hand corner, and there's a cartoon image. Will tell you everything you need to know that is on the slide. So you don't have to read it. And that's not on every slide, but often. Okay, the Stargate Archives. Who are the authors? Dick introduced me. My co-author, who really deserves much of the credit for what you're about to hear today, is Sonali Bhatnagarla. She's a PhD clinical psychologist from India. And she loves to point out to me, she says, Ed, I read and write and speak better English than you do. Please shut up. She's really correct on that. Okay. First of all, we are changing the definition of our phenomenon. Informational side, which is sometimes referred to as anomalous cognition, extrasensory perception, remote viewing, we've lumped that into gaining information by parapsychological means by side. An atypical perceptual ability that allows the acquisition of non-inferential information arising from a distant point in space-time. That's sort of a physics definition of what we're dealing with. What is the Stargate program? First of all, it lasted for 23 years. It started in 1972 through 1995. It was sponsored by the U.S. government for a rather substantial amount of money in the U.S., about $20 million which sounds like a lot of money, but if you break that down over 23 years, it's not a lot of money. And since we were doing it at Stanford Research Institute, they took a lot of overhead money. So by the time the money got to us, we could buy lunch, maybe. And the main thing were three things that we were doing. One mission. This was not an academic program. Its job was to spy. In other words, gather intelligence on the former Soviet Union and China and other East Bloc things. And if we could spy on them, hey, they could spy on us. So we wanted to know whether or not, to what could we defend against that. And lastly, to conduct application-oriented research. In other words, not research to figure out how this works, but to figure out the best way to collect the data. Should you face east? Should you eat M&M candies, stand on your head, those kinds of things. Okay. Funding was $19 million, and I've converted it into euros for you there to give you an idea. Primary source of the archives. The archives are a collection of books, which you'll see about, which is all the material that was formerly classified, militarily classified by the U.S. government, is no longer classified. So I'm able to report it in some detail. And the CIA, excuse me, CIA released about 89,000 pages of material from which we created these books you'll see about. This is fun. This is a memo released by the CIA, signed by, the signature on the lower side is William Colby. At the time, he was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And what I love about this example is I love to beat up on the CIA every time I get a chance. And here's one example. You see some things that are redacted, blacked out. Well, there are about 4 or 5 versions of this memo released, and none of the redactions match. So in a lot of the material that we were able to gather, we could get completely clean, unredacted versions because they didn't know how to put all the redactions together. And what's funny about the one thing that's redacted, not the name of the guy. His signature is the only thing that's redacted. What in the world are they doing? Okay, here's a list of the various documents that were in the release. There were many copies of the same things. There were many examples from published journals. There were articles in the newspaper. They even have what are called transmittal slips. What that means is, if I had a classified document and I was going to give it to Dick and he had the classification, I would say, okay, here's a document number so-and-so, I'm giving it to you, you sign it, and that's a transmittal slip. It has no other information on it at all, and half of the stuff they have there is that kind of stuff in this release. So don't go to the CIA website. You can do that on your own and download all these documents and see what I'm talking about. Okay. These are the archives. It's published by McFarland, and I have 2 examples of them here. There were 4. This is the last one. We're done with it. This is 715 pages long. There are 2 other copies which I don't have here. First one was on remote viewing, and you'll see this here. The first one is remote viewing in the time period from 1974 to 1984. Everything you'd ever want to know about informational psi or remote viewing is in that document that took place in that time period, from what we knew, the best research we could do at that time. Volume 2 is the same thing, except a decade later. And Volume 3, which I do have here, is all on psychokinesis, mind over matter. Pardon me. And the last one, which I also have here, is mainly government reports and memos and that sort of thing within the government arguing about our program, complaining about it or not complaining about it, plus all the operational spying material is in that last volume. Here are the 4 covers. 2 of them are here. The last 2 on the right are here. We have a forward in all 4 volumes. Former Secretary of Defense, the Honorable William S. Cullen. He was Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration. And he wrote a magnificent foreword claiming how well this stuff worked for the intelligence community. He was on the Senate Select Committee for Oversight for Intelligence, so he knew what he was talking about. The second forward is by someone many of you may know, Dr. Richard Broughton. He was formerly at the University of Northampton. Then he was president of the SPR in London. He's now, I think, the treasurer of the SPR in London. And he wrote a foreword for these books also. From the perspective, is there anything in this collection of material that can inform current researchers? So it was a very interesting thing that he wrote for us. Okay, here's a site map of our program. First, primarily, was to gather intelligence. And what we had to do with that is figure out how do you take ESP, or informational psi data, and integrate it with the other intelligence gathering materials within the government. What's the best way you can collect data? Lastly, how do you know when someone said, hey, I see a tank in this building, is it right, wrong, or in between? What kind of indication, a priori indication, do we have whether it's right or wrong? And frankly, we failed at that job. If we could spy on them, they could spy on us. So for an assessment, what were the threats out there during the Cold War, and could we develop countermeasures? The answer to the last question is no. And finally, there are two different types of research, which I've mentioned earlier: application research, just how to get the product better, and lastly, some basic research, which primarily happened in the second decade of the program. On top of all this was amazing amounts of oversight. And what I mean by that is the company that I worked for at the time, Stanford Research Institute, were very, very concerned that we were cheating or somehow doing bad research. So that organization had oversight of us. And then later on, the government said, well, maybe the company has some financial interest to allow these guys to cheat. So there were external oversight as well. I like to joke we have more oversight than a test dummy at a dentist convention. Usually I have a different orifice in mind, but that'll work. And overlaying all of that is this: politics. I spent probably 40% of my time in Washington when I was the director of this program, begging for money on my knees. I wore out many knees in my suit. Okay. From the spying data, we conclude that we are done. Everything else is detail. Probably anybody in here, especially my dear colleague Dick, will agree with this. We do not need any more evidential data, period, end of story. And what I have over here, the word done in a whole bunch of languages, however not in Dutch. Why do I say that? First of all assessments of the spying data, success or failures, were determined not by the researchers, not by us. It was done by the people who said, we have a mission, we want you to do this, and then they would take the data and say whether it was good, bad, or different, and give us no feedback about how good we were doing. Which is rather frustrating. The intelligence community kept returning back for more spying missions. Human-centered intelligence gathering is by definition difficult to interpret, of any kind. Spies of World War II crawling around looking through field glasses, as we humans were terrible observers of what's going on, and then worse, we're terrible reporters of what's going on. Because psychic spying is not immune to this difficult interpretation seen in normal spying, we have named the sign method RV HUMINT. HUMINT means intelligence, HUM in English means human. There's SIGINT, meaning signals intelligence, COVINT, meaning communication intelligence, and so on. So we invented a new term, RV, meaning remote viewing human. RV human has a number of advantages over traditional human. No one is placed in harm's way. We don't have a spy sneaking around behind enemy lines and therefore can't get shot at. They're sitting in a lab, and it's really cheap. A bottle of scotch will get you everything you need. And finally, we focus on the details, determining the physics, physiology, and psychology of the phenomena. That's what we're able to do at this point. I claim ESP is real and is useful. During the time period, we had 504 separate spying missions. And these were set apart over 19 different federal agencies. Let me take a shortcut here for a moment. Suppose one of you wanted to open up a restaurant here in Amsterdam. I understand there are very few restaurants. We need a new one. Is that right? And you had a beautiful little place that only had 19 people that could fit in your restaurant. But you hired the best chef from all over the Netherlands. And they came and you had a marvelous wine cellar, and you had gorgeous decor. And of those 19 people that filled your restaurant on opening night, 17 of them kept coming back for the next week. You would obviously conclude you did something right with your restaurant. Hold that thought. Of these 19 agencies, 17 of them returned for additional missions, and you're going to see a chart of it here. On the left side is what we did at Stanford Research Institute. The 7 was from the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA, which is on public record saying this stuff didn't work. Well, if it didn't work, why don't you come back 7 times? And in fact, with the government program, they came back, I can read better here, they came back 34 additional times. And so the tall bars tell you the number of times these various agencies came back with other missions. The all-time record is something called, that's the biggest spike on the right-hand side there, is a joint task force, military task force. They came back 172 times with different missions. What were their mission? Their mission was drug interdiction. In other words, they had learned by some of the means a boat was leaving Hong Kong or Singapore or something like that, and they wanted to know where, 1 week from today, precognition, can we pick up that boat and search it? We were really good at that job because they kept coming back over and over again. Not only that, when the U.S. authorities boarded the boat and said, well, you think there's drugs on these boats, but there isn't any, the remote viewers would say, go to the starboard aft part of the boat and take a panel off the wall. And when they do that, they found hundreds of pounds of things like cocaine and heroin and so on. We were really good at that job. How we were really good at that job, how this works, I have absolutely little idea about how that works. Professor Jessica Utz, she worked as a visiting scientist in our lab. In 2016, she was the U.S. top statistician. She was president of the American Statistical Association. And in her presidential address, which I don't have here, she said this meets all the standard definitions of what you need for something real. And she said that in her presidential address at the American Statistical Association. This is part of what she said. Using the standards applied to any other area in science, it is concluded that psychic functioning has been well established. The results of the study examined are far beyond what is expected by chance. Arguments that these results could be due to methodological flaws in experiments are soundly refuted. Effects of similar magnitude to those found in government-sponsored research at SRI and SAIC, that's Science Applications International Corporation, have been replicated in a number of laboratories across the world. Such controversy cannot be readily explained by claims of flaws and fraud. Often, this program is thought of being CIA funded, and this is the funding graph. You don't have to know all those organizations, but the third one from the right is the CIA. They gave us 1% of the total funding, so this was not a CIA funded program. It's never a good idea to do science or anything else on testimonials, because those are all subject to all kinds of things. Who did it and for what reasons? You know, with all that as a caveat upstairs, this was a document, I think, dating from 1982. And basically, you can read it. I haven't read the names of some of these alphabet soup agencies. The first order, they loved it, even the CIA. Okay. To show you a little bit of data, this is from the research side of the house. The photograph in the left side of the dam was generated after the response was given. This was a precognitive example. And the right-hand side is all the data that the subject produced. Nothing more. We did not edit it. We did not hide pages that were wrong. That was the total response. And you can just look at it and see that it's not a bad approximation. And when you, this is not a statistical analysis, please don't beat up on me. If you want to see that, I can bore all of you to tears by doing that. Here's an operational example. The participant who I can name, he's no longer with us, named Ingo Swan, very talented fellow. He was given the geographical coordinates of someplace in Russia, about 20 kilometers north of Moscow. And he registered his psychic experience by building clay models instead of writing and drawing. And what he drew there was a truncated pyramid, four-sided pyramid, and he said when you cut it in half, you should never want to be inside of it when it's working. That's what he said in the transcript. They recorded what he was saying. And then the next picture down on the left is a patch. I've got something going on here. He couldn't figure out where that fit. And the next picture over is a satellite image of that era. And the color picture is one of current. It's a truncated pyramid. It's 500 meters on the side. It is enormously huge. And it was exactly that. It's a over-the-horizon anti-ballistic missile radar site. And it's still in operation today. And my colleagues and I here in Russia are putting together a multi-part documentary. And we have official permission to take film inside this building. There are a lot of nicknames for this particular project over the years, and all these nicknames were unclassified. So I could call up a colleague in Washington and say, hey, I want to come and talk about Gondola Wish. And they would know what I meant, I would know what I meant, and the spies listening in would have no idea, so called. And so here are a few of them. Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sun Street, Quantum Leap I want to tell you about. I walked out of the Pentagon with an Army colonel. He said, Dad, I've got great news for you. We just have a new nickname for your program, Quantum Leap. I said, do we have to? He said, what's wrong with you? I said, a quantum leap is the smallest possible progress above absolutely none. Can't we have a better name? So they said, yes, we have a better name. We call it Stargate, and that's where it's now known across the world as a program funded by the U.S. government. However, kinder, gentler Army. This was before the days of PowerPoint, and my colleague at Huntsville, Alabama, the Missile Intelligence Agency, was going to Washington to give a talk on Grill Flame. So he told the AI department, well, you know, this is about remote viewing and Grill Flame and so on, and here's the cover slide, which fortunately he never actually used. Positively dreadful, and at least I got it before he went off to the Pentagon to describe this. Here's a very brief history. I can't tell you about a 23-year program in a couple of hours or a matter of minutes, so this will be a one-slide short-form history. From Stanford Research Institute, used to be called, it's now called SRI International. It was, up until the 70s, a research arm of Stanford University in Palo Alto. And we did work there from 72 to 1989 for a total of about 12.2 million euros at that time period. And then I shifted the program to Science Applications International Corporation, another huge organization, for another 4 years or so, and at about 5.5 million euros worth of money. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ deserve huge credit for starting this program. I feel fortunate to be standing on tall shoulders. I could not have done what they did, and I had a different set of rules, and they probably would have had difficulty doing it my way also. So it's a nice blend of all of us. I joined the program actually in late 75 up to 1995, became the project director for the research from 1985 to 1995. All the research, there's no hidden jewels that I can't tell you about, have all been declassified in 1989. And as I said, we had more oversight than you could possibly think of, and later on you'll have a chance to look at what that was. And because of that, we made, I think, substantial scientific progress. From 72 to 1995, there was a whole list of people that not only knew about our program, but in fact approved it. including Jimmy Carter, Vice President George Bush, and a whole bunch of other people you may not recognize their names. But these are top people in the intelligence and military world of the US government. Knew about our program and approved it, I mean. They didn't improve it. Okay. You won't recognize any of these names. So the only reason I'm showing all of this is to give you an idea. This was not just a couple of people. There was a research team. They were not all there at the same time. Consultants and visiting scientists, those names you might recognize, Dean Radin and Jessica Utz. Even Evan Harris Walker, who was a well-known physicist in our field, who was a consultant for us. It's not well known that we gave out something close to a little over 700,000 euros in subcontracts to the research community in parapsychology, to many of these places. Some were parapsychology and some were not. We gave some money to Bob Morris and Chuck Honerton, and they built their Ganzfeld with our money. The entire Ganzfeld apparatus was funded by us. Research, a little bit. As I said, we have two types of research applied to make it better, and protocols for operational remote viewing, how to identify reputable and calibrated participants. In other words, who are the good guys, and can they do it over and over again? Identify appropriate targets. You can't, if you wanted to know what's the combination of the safe in the head of Russia's office, that's the wrong kind of tasking. We can't get that information. So that's what I mean by identify appropriate targets. And could we develop countermeasures? No. Basic, how does this stuff work? And I hope during the question and answering period, you guys will be happy to tell me how it works, because at this stage, I have very little idea about it. But it's challenging. Remote viewing can provide useful information, useful intelligence information. Laboratory and operational remote viewing show the greatest potential for practical applications. This is a result of a meta-analysis of the SRI period data done almost exclusively by Jessica Utz. And these are some of her conclusions. Remote viewing ability does not degrade over time. We do not see, we very little measure for decline effect over, in some cases, 20 years of experience. And literally hundreds of remote viewings. If there's quite a variance up and down like that, it doesn't improve, which is very frustrating. It doesn't get better over time, but at least in our group, it didn't decay. And I think I have some ideas of why that's the case, because in other areas, we, as a field, struggle mightily with the decline effect. At this time, there's no quantitative evidence for support of training. And boy, that's frustrating. The government gave us large sums of money, millions of dollars actually, to be able to train Army personnel to collect data like this, and we just simply flat failed at that job. We could not do that. Because the definition of training is a little difficult. For example, if you try to train me to be a Wimbledon champion in tennis, don't. That would be a really stupid thing to do. What you can do is train me to whatever my natural skill level is, up to that level, how to attain my natural skill level. And I think in our field we over-mystify ESP. You say, oh, it's so weird. No. Let's at least start what we think we know about. For example, you can't train beyond people's skill level. And guess what? We find that in Psi as well. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people on the network, mainly retired Army people, that would not have any idea what they're talking about, think that you can train anybody up to be a a Wimbledon champion, so to speak. Natural scenes are significantly better with symbols and targets and a bunch of other stuff. There's no evidence to support psychoenergetic interaction with the physical world. We spent a substantial amount of money, and all of our PK research is in this book, and we spent a lot of money on it, and we cannot confirm to see under laboratory conditions psychokinesis. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. You can never prove that statement. All you can say is we have not yet seen it. Other people might, and there's some people here, I'm pleased to say, is taking very good new research on that, and I wish you all the luck in the world, but it won't work. But give it a try. Electromagnetic shielding against electromagnetic shielding is not effective against psychoenergetic acquisition of information. Okay, here's a brief idea of some of the oversight. During the SRI years up to 1985, there were various organizations who looked over us to make damn sure we weren't cheating or fooling ourselves, or bad protocols or questionable research practices, which is the modern phrase for such things, important as it is. I apologize for coughing, because I'm not usually normally that way. 1985 to 1995, the whole game shifted. I had a $10 million contract from the Army Medical Research Development Command, and so we could hire the best possible people who were skeptics but open-minded to oversee what we have. And later on, if you want to see those names, I'm happy to show them to you. We had 3. Scientific Oversight Committee, whose job it was to review our protocols before we did our experiments. And we'd go back and forth until we get an agreed-upon protocol. And then they had drop-in privileges, which they never actually used, unannounced. But then their most valuable contribution is they reviewed each of our final reports. For example, in my year, when I took over the project in 1987, I had $1.875 million. I know that number really well, because at the end of the year, it was $500 overspent, which I consider that an economic miracle. But I had a full colonel who was sitting there from the Army overlooking me, spent 2 weeks on company money to find that effing $500. I said, hey, I'll write you a check. He said, no, it was really a pain. But that's when we would send out our final reports to this august body of research or scientists, skeptical, and they were to review our program in writing. And that's in volume 2 of this book, their comments. And we could comment back. And that was from my speaking as the top thrill in my entire academic career, was interacting with these people. We won about 85% of the arguments we had with them, but the real good thing that I loved about the most was the 15% of the arguments we lost, because we learned how to improve ourselves and really have a chance of figuring out what's going on. We had an institutional review board. I'm going to let you call that here. It's Human Use Committee. We had to make sure that we weren't torturing our subjects at least too badly. And lastly, we had a policy oversight committee from the federal government to see whether we were still on the right path, given the intelligence mission of this entire project. Some accomplishments. I'm going to tell you some non-accomplishments later. Fundamental testable model of experimental psi, what we call decision augmentation theory, is simply the most unpopular model in history. People that I know here, like my friend Dick, I don't think buys that story at all. But nonetheless, the data seems to support it. And it takes away cherished hypotheses. Let me tell you a little first-hand experience with that. I hate this model. I did what's called a pre-stimulus response experiment. I would measure somebody's skin conductance on their hand, and every once in a while, every 30 seconds plus or minus 10 seconds, they would get a huge sound for 97 decibels of white noise in their ears. Scare the hell out of you. And you jump off your chair, and you get this huge response. And we got an amazing amount of data showing that really works, that the autonomic nervous system responded in advance of sound compared to in advance of controls. Wow, that's my cherished hypothesis. It all went away. We could find out it was not the autonomic nervous system responding, it was whoever pushed the button to start the experiment were using their side to make it look like that. And I have 3 cartoon slides to illustrate this later on. We have a thermodynamic model based on entropy, target characteristics, information transfer bit rates. It's very crude. In informational theory, informational science, people worry about transfer bit rates. If you listen to your favorite symphony with tin cans and a string, it's not very good. But if you listen to it through high definition audio, it's beautiful. And the difference is the bandwidth, how much information you can get through in that electromagnetic spectrum. And so our bit rate here is positively dreadful, even worse than the telephone system in California. Research methodology to elicit high quality psi nearly on demand, almost on demand. Not quite. It raises a second question later on. A host of practical applications of psi and development of a testable model of precognition. Some failures. Notice that poor guy up there staring at his feet. We did not develop a valid psi training methodology. It just didn't work. Did not develop a successful confidence calling procedure so that we knew, pay attention to this response, but not that one. We failed at that. Did not identify personality factors that were predictive of psi performance, so we spent a lot of effort trying to do just that. Was not effective educating government personnel in the proper psi protocols. We failed miserably at that. We claim it's their fault, not ours. Okay, that's the end of the formal talk. I'm happy to, I don't know what the timing is, we can come back later, or how much time do we have?
No, it's okay. I had a program that I don't know about hard.
You're the boss.
Let the people first say how they want to proceed.
Okay, let me tell you what this slide is. The top one is, the numbers are 10, like in this one, is how many slides there are in that particular laboratory approach. How do we do this in the lab? How do we analyze the data? And there's an 11-minute video in that particular thing showing remote viewing. So the guy on camera, first time he ever did it on national television in the US. Oversight committee, 3 slides, no video. Metaphasic model of precognition is a 16-slide formal theory paper with two videos, one 4 and one 3 minutes. Decision augmentation theory, I can show you that. That's really quick. 3 slides. Where are we? Oh, this way. Okay. Imagine what do you call it, a drug trial. And you've got a population like that, and often in these drug trials you have a control condition, and you have a treatment condition, and you have an unbiased process to sort this population into various groups, all right? And then you have a resistant who doesn't know about anything, and is either given a placebo or the actual drug you're testing. And I made up a statistic which is not unlike the real statistics in these kinds of studies for medical practices. That's the causal interaction of how effective that particular medicine that she's testing. This is how you do it. The problem is, in any real population, there's not homogeneous anything. Sex differences, age differences, severity of disease differences, and so on and so on. If you're in the United States and you get a contract from the National Institutes of Health to do a study, you are obligated not to do the randomization of subjects. I don't know if you know that. And around medical schools in the whole U.S., there are little cottage industries of companies whose sole job it is to do the randomization because they don't even know what the hell the study is about, and so they're not biased in any way. So here we have a population, and we have a really healthy one who eats well and works out, and he's nice and in good shape. And we have a really skinny guy who eats candy all day long and watches television. And here we have the same thing, control group, except now we have a putative side-biased random process. In other words, you could use your psychic ability by pressing a button in such a way to put most of the healthy people in that group and most of the unhealthy group in the control group, and tell the poor resistant who doesn't know he's taking the drug out completely and get the same statistic. This is what's called decision augmentation, a using person's psi, usually below their level of conscious awareness, to in fact make it look like the cherished hypothesis was true.
Yeah, he's a pretty funny guy. Anyway, there's another hour actually of material, so I'm going to show that to you too, right after this.
All right, thank you. What I'm going to show here is kind of a schematic of how one in our laboratory would do a precognition trial, all right? And I love cartoons. So here we have a participant and a monitor in a room at 10 in the morning. No targets have been generated, so both people inside this chamber are completely blind to what's going on. So we conduct a very stylized 15-minute interview, the monitor will, with the participant. And here's the question is asked. I'll read it for you. Please access and describe a photograph I will show you in the future in about 20 minutes. That's the tasking, telling the remote viewer what to do, which is very, very, very important in these kinds of studies. But then still no target has been generated yet. So some fraction of the time, a miracle happens. She gets a mental image picture in her head and describes that in some detail. Now that's a recognizable picture as the Taj Mahal in India. But still, no target has been generated. So what we do is secure this data so she can't cheat, the monitor can't cheat, the data is now secured and hidden away. Then the computer randomly selects from a pre-defined set, in our case 300 separate type of images, picks one randomly. Lo and behold, that is not an analysis. That's simply how we collect the data. Whether you think it agrees or it doesn't, that's how we collect the data. So how in the world would we analyze something like that? Here's a real set of data, nothing hidden, from an Apple Corporation engineer who thought remote viewing and ESP was completely silly. He had never done this before in his whole life. And I translated his writing into script, intersection, notch or groove, wave, seawall, gap. This is his entire response. I've not taken the terrible stuff and hidden it from you. That's everything he said. All right, so what do we do with that? I can look at that all day long, and I challenge you, but have no idea what the target photograph is based on that material. You've seen this before. Okay, here's how it was done. There were 5 pictures generated randomly. We used fuzzy set arithmetic to determine it, and Dick got it right. But the analyst has to decide which of these things. And it's usually not as straightforward as you think, and even in this case. There's waves. This is the only picture that has waves in it, guys, so why would you focus on the X?
The waterfall is also waves.
Well, hang on, just let me finish. All right, there's the windmill, all right? All right, here is, it's not waves in the traditional sense, but it's not even a sea wall, which is part of the response. It is a wall of water coming down a wall of rock. That's allegorical in some sense. And so Dick got it right, but when you are a blind judge to this, it is very, very difficult to do that because it depends upon which element you're going to pay attention to. All right? Well, Dick was right. Here's a gap would be what you'd see looking down on the city. And I was the judge in this case. I also got it right. That was the right answer. But I wanted to illustrate this is not usually straightforward. The amount of information you get in a given session is terrible, even worse than the telephone system in California, as I said earlier. Okay, total results. Here's for those people who are interested in the statistics. There were 20,000, we did 3 Apple engineers. The overall study was significant with an effect size of 0.53, which is really quite healthy. And we had 1 person that was individually, in his 8 trials, produced an effect size of 0.6. First time that people ever did it. So it was really remarkable. They went away scratching their head and said, this is still impossible, I'll go home and think about it. Okay, here's a case as part of our application-oriented research. The government wants to know if you can find someone who can do lucid dreaming and you instruct them before they go to bed that when you have a lucid dream, which is a dream you are aware of that you're dreaming while you're having that experience, scoot out of the dream and go over and spy on the Soviet Union and tell us what you got and come back. Except in this case, we told the lucid dreamer, in the neighboring laboratory, there's an envelope on the wall, and inside that envelope is a photograph. So signal us with your eyes, which is what you can do when you're lucid dreaming, that you now are asleep and you're aware that you are lucid. This was monitored by Stephen LeBerge, one of the first people to really take lucid dreaming into the laboratory. And when you do that, get out of your dream bed, go next door, find the envelope, open it up, study the picture, come back, wiggle your eyes, we'll wake you up. Okay, so that all happened. We woke up this guy and he said, you know, could I search that laboratory next door? I could not find the envelope on the wall. But, he said, I realize this is a dream. Tell you what, I sort of clicked my heels together in his dream, and he said, I want to go and stand where the photographer stood when he took the picture that's in the envelope I can't find. I am just reporting what this guy said. Whether he did any of that, who the hell knows? And so when we woke him up, he drew this picture. It's the only data that he had. Key mountain, barn, large cabin, shadows of mountains, trees, road, a path, American Rockies, or maybe the Alps. The picture that he couldn't find in the envelope was that. I'll tell you, I couldn't draw it that well looking at the damn picture. So I said to the guy, hey, you really screwed up. You missed the car. So here are the results that's for our decoy pictures. But here's the results of 21 trials that we did in this study with that effect size, which was not significantly different from being awake. And so Chuck Honerton invented the Ganzfeld for the same reason we've invented Get Away With This. Who wants to stay up all night while somebody's dreaming? We don't have to. So here, you know, please understand, and don't beat up on me, that this is not an academic proof of anything. It was an indication we should not go forward with lucid dreaming while we're spying. It just doesn't give you enough of an effect size. Okay. Here's Joe McMonagle. Joe McMonagle, in fact, he's interviewed, I won't tell you what he was, because in the 11-minute piece I'm about to show you, you'll learn everything you want to know about him anyway. Okay? This was Joe's first example on national television in the U.S. The program was called Put to the Test. It was on ABC national television in 1995. It was before it was released that we were working for the intelligence community. So he couldn't mention what we were doing, what happened. It was just simply a remote viewing on camera. And it was his first such remote viewing on camera, of which he's probably done hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating now. It was done real time. The producers spent $150,000 on this 11-minute experiment.
Extrasensory perception, ESP. We've all heard of someone who says they have it, and scientists from around the world have spent decades trying to explain it. Well, you're about to meet a man who claims to possess this extraordinary ability, and has allowed us to put him to the test.
For most of his adult life, Joe McMonagle was a professional soldier. 2 brutal tours of Vietnam, U.S. Army intelligence, a Legion of Merit award winner, a black and white world, clearly defined and limited to his 5 senses. But in 1970, Joe claims that world was turned inside out. In a restaurant, Joe suddenly felt ill and staggered outside. This is the first time he's told his story on television.
It was sort of a pop, and I found myself standing on a cobblestone road watching the rain go through my hands, and looked up and saw my body sort of half in and half out of the doorway. I knew at that point that I was probably dead.
Joe was rushed to a hospital, where he arrived, showing no signs of life.
I felt as though I was falling backwards and was enveloped by a white light.
So here you are, you almost died, and then all these strange things start happening to you. What's going through your mind?
It shattered all my concepts of reality. I started having spontaneous out-of-bodies. I'd lay down for a nap on the couch or something, and I just find myself suddenly out of my body, somewhere else, totally.
Joe also claims he started having other unexplainable experiences, like knowing what complete strangers were thinking. For 8 years, he kept his extrasensory perceptions to himself. Unbeknownst to Joe, 3,000 miles across the country, this man, Dr. Edwin May, and a select group of investigative scientists were just beginning to study extrasensory perception, ESP.
When I first got involved with this, I was very skeptical. I said, if this is real, it's critically important. After 20 years, I've come to the conclusion something interesting is going on.
How do you study ESP in the lab? Well, scientists developed an experiment called remote viewing. The person being tested is placed in a closed room. A researcher then goes to an unknown location, and the subject is asked to use ESP to draw what that researcher is seeing. Over the past 20 years, Dr. May has conducted thousands of these remote viewing experiments. In 1978, he started testing Joe McMoneagle, and Dr. May claims Joe has drawn scores of unknown sights, 50% of the time with remarkable and unexplainable success.
In one of his best hits, we had a person that was in the administration building at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. And all Joe drew was the laboratory, the perfect plan view of what this laboratory looks like. The interesting thing is, Joe's never been to Livermore. And this person could have been hiding anywhere in the entire continent of the USA. We've looked in the laboratory to figure out what's special about Joe. We've looked medically, neurophysiologically, physically, behaviorally, in every way one can look at a human being. And the good news is, Joe is boringly normal like the rest of us. But what we are proposing is that there is a sixth, an additional sense, that is responsible for what Joe does in the laboratory and in the real world.
Does Joe McMoneagle actually have a sixth sense, a sense which cannot be explained? To test his abilities, we flew him here to Houston, a city to which he's never been. For Joe, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. The needle, a random location. The haystack, the 5,436 square miles that make up Greater Houston. We hired a movie location scout who spent 5 days finding a wide variety of distinct target sites.
I think all of them have dramatic Houston elements with very defined architectural styles. And, you know, one of the things that I did not want to do is repeat any common denominator. I did not want there to be 2 archways. I didn't want there to be 2 triangles in the visual.
Following Dr. May's scientific protocol, the producers reduced the hundreds of possible sites down to 4. A life-size treehouse on the George Ranch. A visually dramatic portion of the theme park Astro World. The ship channel at the Port of Houston Authority. And a famous local landmark, the water wall. Without Joe's knowledge, those locations were photographed and placed in numbered envelopes at our downtown headquarters. We hired Officer Bill Baker of the Houston Police Department to retain custody of those envelopes. Joe McMoneagle, sequestered in a windowless, soundproof room, we placed the 4 numbered envelopes in an adjacent room. To choose our final location, Julie Wiesen, a local marketing executive, was asked to roll the dice.
So the number is 2. So Officer Baker, why don't you take envelope number 2?
For the test, we selected Jessica Miller from the Houston Visitors Bureau to be what the scientists call the target person. Inside envelope number 2 was the photograph of the Houston Ship Channel. It would be Jessica's job to go to the target site and carefully observe every detail. In theory, through ESP, Joe might actually be able to see the location through Jessica's eyes. We would simultaneously record both Jessica and Joe. So while they drove, Joe began what he calls his cool-down period, similar to meditation, clearing his mind of all outside distractions. After 30 minutes, it was time for our test to begin. I had no knowledge of any of the locations.
We have been radioed that our crew and our target person are now on site. So I'm going to show you a picture.
This is our target person. Have you ever seen her before?
No, I've never seen her before.
Describe for us the environment that she's in.
For television purposes, we've condensed the 15-minute session. Remember, these are the 4 locations in the envelopes. But all Joe knows is that the location is anywhere in Greater Houston.
First impression of getting is kind of a, I'm going to call it a river for lack of a better name. My sense is that it's both natural and man-made, so there's probably been something done to this river. It's been dredged or seawalls, formal walls of some kind.
I didn't know it, but within moments, with just a few strokes of his pen, Joe had eliminated not only our 3 other locations, but the infinite number of possible sites around Houston. Now the question became, how detailed could he get?
Many vertical lines that are perpendicular one to the other, but the horizontal lines seem to have curves. The actual target itself is more on an incline.
Remember, at this moment, Joe is attempting to see what Jessica is seeing.
Now she's looking up, so there's something tall at the target. Keeps looking up at it. I want to say there's like a bridge nearby. My sense is the bridge isn't meant for traffic, not meant for people.
As you're going through this process, is this confined just to visual?
Some of it's visual, but some of it's also hearing or smells or taste or just sensations.
Towards the end of Joe's session, a huge cargo ship docked right in the middle of our location, dramatically altering the target site.
I'm just getting a lot of metallic noise. There's something else down here as well. It's a very, very large object. I don't think it's a building. I don't know what that is. But this is a very large object. It's stall behind me, part of the entrance. And then I get sort of almost a specifically designed platform. I get a feeling like there's a black stripe down the center of it. This is about probably all I'm going to get on this target.
It was now time to go to the target site. Remember, Joe's impressions included a bridge, a river improved by man, seawalls, a very large object, and lots of metallic noise. When we arrived, we met Jessica, and unbelievably, we saw what she saw. A bridge, a river improved by man, a very large object, and a barge used for dredging. This is scary. Take a look at that, and then take a look at the barge in the water, and the shape of that.
Looks exactly like this.
Were you looking at that during the
I looked at that a lot because I, looked all down in that direction, so I did look at it a lot.
What really impresses me is this large object. I'm looking at this ship, and I can't believe it, because that's right on the nose. Now, in terms of the bridge, you said you thought it was more foot traffic than automobile.
That's obviously something got twisted in the interpretation. Generally speaking, about 80% of what I do say usually turns out to be correct.
Are you pleased with the way this turned out?
Yeah, I'm pleased. I think out of all the places that we could have been around Houston, this is very much fits the picture of the area.
About 20% of what Joe does is as close to spectacular as I could possibly wish. Scientists don't like to use the term miracle very often, but this is as close to one as you can imagine.
Coincidence, chance, or an extrasensory ability that exists in all of us. If you were skeptical, like I was, then perhaps what Joe McGonigal accomplished today opened all of our minds just a bit. Reporting from the Houston Ship Channel, I'm Bill McIntyre.
A couple of background stories on that. The location scout came to my lab in Palo Alto, and I spent probably 5 hours with her, giving her suggestions on how to pick targets, which she apparently used. I had no other action in this study whatsoever. There's one trial, it's not a study. And I called Joe up afterwards. I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm exhausted. And that turns out to be, I don't know if you guys see it or not, but doing remote viewing is exceptionally tiring. And that's why we only try to do one trial a day at best, usually a couple a week. The other background story in this, they all went out for drinks afterwards, and Joe said, well, I knew it was a ship, but you didn't report it. Can I put it back in there? And Joe said, no, it was not part of the record, it doesn't count.
I have a question.
Yes.
I think I saw a breach of protocol.
Which is?
The police officer saw the target and he was returning.
No,
yes, he was looking on the target.
when?
When they opened the envelope.
I don't, was he standing there? I don't
Yeah.
remember. Okay, so, all right, fair enough. Was there an interaction between the police guy and anybody on the study?
Of course there wasn't, but I think protocol is that they should open it only in the car.
Of course, and this was the first time the ABC people had done it, and they had nobody on side. I agree with you about it, by the way. I'm not arguing against it, but I'm just saying the context was an entertainment show. So that's, I agree with that issue. It's hard to do a perfect experiment, and this one has that minor flaw.
I know.
Okay. The other thing was that I asked Joe, when did you do, and it gets directly to the question you just asked, when did you do this remote viewing? And he says, if you think I'm going to do a real-time remote viewing on national television, you're full of it. I did it in a hotel over breakfast. Yeah, he did the remote viewing overnight, not the drawings, but he did the remote viewing in his head while he was having breakfast in the hotel before going to the studio to do this. So all the stuff was just as he remembered what he used to do it. And so that raises the question, when, look, here's a bigger issue, which is a research issue. If in fact it is true that we human beings have access to all information through all space and all time, and we were cognitively aware of it, we'd go crazy immediately. So the two questions that answer asks are, when does a psychic open that door slightly? And more importantly, when does that door close? Joe McMonagle has a suggestion about when it's open is the tasking, when you say to the subject, or even tomorrow you're going to come into the experiment doing a study, it's already open at that time. What I think closes it, and if you're interested, I can tell you there's an experiment that we're designing that can get at the question that the feedback, not necessarily to the person, but the feedback, when it's designated as the feedback, probably close that door. And there's a way to test that in the laboratory. But so they're really important questions that you asked.
Sounds like Schrodinger's cat.
Pardon me?
It sounds like Schrodinger's cat to me.
I don't know.
Observational theory, I think.
And it's not true until you look in the box.
We can argue about that one.
He doesn't like that.
Okay. Someone asked earlier, we did some spying simulations where it's a technology target because we were asked, can you use remote viewing to detect directed beam energy weapon systems in Russia? We did two such things, and they spent 56K euros for each of the two sessions. So it's quite nice. So there are two trials, one a year apart. Park outline, Joe McMonagle was a subject, and all we had was a social security number, which is social security number, which is something in the U.S. if you work, that's what you have. Otherwise unknown. 4 sessions were conducted 8 hours apart, beginning at midnight one night to the following midnight. We did the analysis with what's called fuzzy set analysis, and I won't bore you with the details of that, but basically we compute 2 things, actually 3 things. The accuracy, what percentage of the target was correctly described by the response? And the target was defined by the Air Force, who funded this work. We didn't define it, they did. Then the reliability is, of all the things the subject says when they are giving you the response, what fraction of that is correct? So it turns out a good measure of the quality of the work is what we call the figure of merit, which is you multiply those 2 numbers together. And when Joe said he gets 80%, you'll see why here. This trial I'm not going to show you, but it's close to 80% reliability. That was an electron accelerator near Livermore, California. This is what I'm going to show you, a 1 gigahertz microwave generator in the state of New Mexico. And again, it's pretty similar to the size of what he's done. It was remarkably consistent. Okay, this is not all of his response. This is a fraction of it, and I'll translate some of it. 6 by 4 centimeters. Had he said inches, it would have been correct. Wrapped environment. Measurement of shock waves. Wavefront emitter. General effect size overall emitter. If all you had was this data and you wondered what was going on in some secret place in Russia, you'd say, well, we're not sure, but we better have something to detect microwaves. Because that looks like a microwave waveform. The picture on the right looks like a microwave horn. The site was that. And there were a lot of other people with more standard techniques looking in on this study. We were the only one that got it right. Yeah.
I was wondering, was Joe aware that it could be high energy?
He knew it was a technology target, but that's it. It could have been anything. Rocket launches, power reactors.
But not landscapes.
No landscapes, no. It was high technology. Because again, it doesn't really quite qualify as an academic exercise. It was, can remote viewing detect directed beam energy weapon systems? And at least for these two trials, the answer was sort of yes. And along with other techniques. This is the secret facility in Fort Meade, Maryland, in which the remote viewing was done. It was an old World War II barracks. There was no sign of what was going on inside of it. It was falling down and quite a mess. But inside, it was pretty well appointed. Very secret. You know, wasn't there. It was a really strange environment to be in. This is a well-known American senator, Claiborne Pell, who was very much interested in the work. And the guy to the left of him is Darryl Graff, and those are top secret security safes along the wall. Okay, you can get a clue with the cartoon in the upper hand corner. We take this stuff extremely seriously. There's a Jewish Hungarian cowboy. I used to do this on the back of a galloping horse at rodeos. I still can do that, believe it or not. Joe is stubborn. I mean, you'll never meet a more stubborn guy than Joe McMonagle. He said, I'm not taking the damn plane home from Moscow. I'm riding home on my faithful steed. He's still there. Okay, here's a few examples, spine examples. The top numbers there are the geographical coordinates. In those days, they weren't encrypting them, but those were the actual geographical coordinates of a site. You won't be able to read that, but I'll show you this. Much to my surprise, I went to Google Earth with those coordinates, and the damn place is still there after 30 years. I've been working with Joe McMonagle since 1979, all the way up to a few weeks ago. Okay. So that's the pin that corresponding to that geographical coordinate. He said there's a river, and there's a river right there. There's a building which is somewhat shaped like the one that he drew. He said there's a building northeast of it in the city of this other town located 3 kilometers northwest, rather. That's not terribly impressive, actually. Another example, Mr. Ingo Swan, instead of representing his experience in play, like I showed you earlier, he cut out a black paper and pasted it on the white paper. And I took Google Earth and turned the picture to line up with the response. This was an airfield in Iran. Well, let's see, go back there. And he got it as an airfield next to a body of water, and satellite imagery in those days could get that as well. So this isn't of great intelligence value. But the next one is. In fact, I was giving a talk in Hong Kong at the end of 2018, and I was very hesitant, should I show this in Hong Kong? Because this was an operational target in China during the Cold War on a nuclear test. But I showed it anyway. You won't be able to see this. Some weeks preceding the event, precognition. What he said was, the viewer was blind targeted on simply the words, event of interest. No geographical coordinates, no nothing. Just tell us the event of interest, what do you got? A few days later, after the event, the viewer again was blind targeted on event of interest. Let's see. Result from the first one, in response to the Advanced Targeting Bureau correctly identified an event as a plane drop nuclear test event. That was exactly what the Chinese were doing. An airdrop, drop an atomic bomb, let it go boom in the desert. That's what the area kind of looks like from Google Earth. This wasn't Ingo, this is someone I won't name. This person, 09, said, and part of his response was, it looks like Roman candles and fireworks that go whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And that's exactly what happens when you set fire to plutonium, but it doesn't go nuclear. So what they knew, this was an intelligence first, they knew that the bomb test failed. Okay. This one was done in the US by the late Hella Hammond. Again, she has the coordinates. This raises a very interesting cognitive issue. That is, Hella has no idea what a rocket test is. She was an artist, a photographer. So she did the best she could. She drew it rather accurately. And that's the pin where I got it from Google Earth. There's smoke, rain-making machine. And she said it was a locomotive, an old steam locomotive, because it makes a lot of noise and dust and stuff. And that's exactly what was going on there. But she didn't have the vocabulary, which is really interesting, to describe her experience. And in the early work, Puthoff and Targ found a weak correlation of remote viewing skill with IQ, intelligence quotient. And what we think was going on with that, and people that have a higher IQ have a more richer vocabulary, can better describe their experiences. We think that was an artifact. Now, this has only been displayed once, so I want to show of hands. That is, I'm about to show you some secret that has not been shown. Will you all agree to keep it in this room? Raise your hands. Come on! Do you have the CIA phone number?
I will not take pictures.
Theoretical physicist with powers of ESP stealing a thought experiment from a colleague. Do I get to choose one now?
Go ahead.
I want to show.
Wait. We are supposed to leave some time for questioning till 5 o'clock.
Okay, this will be really quick. It's just a bunch of slideshow on the Russians. All right?
The Russians, yeah.
I took that picture in St. Basil's at Red Square. Really beautiful. Okay, that is General Alexei Yurovich Savin. He ran the Russian remote viewing program with 120 remote viewers in it. I said, hey Alex, don't you, with all those medals on your chest, how do you keep from falling on your face? He's now retired, that's what he looks like now. This was a group, Joe and I were there in Moscow, and these are Russian remote viewers. And the guy between the two in the back row, the tall guy, there's a strange looking guy. We have no idea where he was from, but he was very quiet, wouldn't talk to us. This woman, well, you'll see. Some viewers, all women, there they take their remote viewers and give them weapons training. They give them hand-to-hand combat training. There's Elena Klimova, and we did one remote viewing with her. She's equally as good as Joe McMonagle was. And she's wearing a pin, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I said, hey Alex, what about the word remote in remote viewing you don't understand? Because they took the remote viewers to the Chechnya war. He said, oh, the bullets are whizzing over their head, they're really motivated. I don't believe that at all, but that's what we did. Okay, that is group, the romantic name 10,003. And if you know a little Cyrillic, that stands for General Staff at the bottom. And Joe and I are honorary members of this group. Yay. Okay, this is a quick slideshow. That is Alex and me. There's the guy on the right is Boris Ratnikov. I'll tell a quick story about Ratnikov. He's Major General in the KGB. He was head of Yeltsin's security team. You don't think a KGB guy's being funny. This guy's a hoot. You'd like to have him over for dinner because he's a very funny guy. And he describes how his first job at the KGB, he was political officer on board a Soviet-era pleasure cruise boat. Who knew? I didn't even know they had them in those days. So they're out. His job was to keep people from defecting when they pulled into Western ports. That was his job. Okay. They're out in the middle of the Mediterranean, bored out of their minds. So they decided to hold a beauty contest on board the boat to pick Miss Cruz. Major Boris Ratnikov, KGB, dresses up in full drag, breasts, hips, makeup, wig, and enters the contest. And he wins! I said, hey, Boris, so you're that cute in the dress? He says, I'm gorgeous in the dress, just like that. But the funny part was, he said when the other women on the boat found out that what had happened, they literally tried to drown him in the swimming pool. They had to fight for his life. So angry. The woman in the middle there is a part of the remote viewing team. Her name's Angela Ford, and the guy on the right-hand side is Nikolai Shum, second in command of KGB, who wrote a foreword for one of our books. This guy on the left is Tofik Dadashev. He is the KGB's top psychic in the 60s and 70s. And he's going to cooperate with us for remote viewing. He makes a hell of a lot of money. When I call him up, I know him pretty well. He says, oh, you're in town, great, I want to take you for dinner. I said, okay. So we went to a 5-star hotel right off Red Square, and we went to a steakhouse. And he brought his son, and there were 3 of us, and the meal probably cost $1,000 US, and he would not let me even hint at helping to pay that. So he's got a remote viewing business in South Moscow. He's obviously doing pretty well. The guy on the right is Yuri Gurgaev. He was former head of the Russian Academy of Sciences, speaks quite fluent English, thought this stuff was really hot stuff, and was in support of it. And when I first met him a number of years ago, he wanted me to come to the laboratory because our model of entropy, he's a solid state physicist, this guy. He wanted me to work with people there to see if we could build a chip that was psychic. And basically it was the language problem that kept it from happening. These are the 2 books, ESP Wars, East and West. You can buy it on Amazon for $4 US on Kindle. The Russian version on the other side says Side Wars, West and East, the other way around. And the Russian underneath said History from the Accounts of Eyewitnesses. We gave a talk in Moscow about this. And this is interesting. I don't know if you can see that if you read Cyrillic, you can't see it well. It's Duma. It's the lower house in the Russian government, right? And if Lenin in his tomb on Red Square, if he could lift his head, look to the left, he'd see that. This is Christmas time. He would go crazy. This is Christmas. This is an important picture. Now that building is notoriously awful. It was the KGB headquarters in a prison called pWIbgA. Terribly awful place. People went in there, they were tortured mercilessly and never let out. But the Russians now are ashamed of it, so guess what? They changed the name of the building. Good for them. What they didn't change was the metro stop to get there. So you go to pWIbgA stop to get to this place. And that's an important picture. That's Angela Ford, who was one of the U.S.'s top military intelligence analysts. And I thought it was kind of ironic to have her standing in front of that building. And there was one day where we were freezing cold. Most of the time in Moscow in 2017, it wasn't very much. That's it.
Okay.
Question and answer. Right?
Questions and answers, because there must be many questions, and we have another 50 minutes. So go ahead, fire. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Russians had 120 remote viewers. You said how many the Americans had?
At any given time, about 12.
12?
Yeah, or less.
Oh wow! Thank you.
Is the Russian program also closed?
Yeah, they're the door now, yes. And it's interesting, when I first met Alex, he was still working in the Ministry of Defense. And Larissa Volenskaya and I were there. We went into his classified room. He was in uniform. He says, come, I want to show you. We went into an adjacent room, and on a table was classified documents from the U.S. in English. I've never asked him how the hell did he get those. Maybe next time I see him, I'll ask him. Hang on a moment.
There was another question there. Yes, Mark.
You spent about 20 million euros on research, and you showed us that a lot of the research showed that there was nothing to be found. If you could give an advice to future researchers, what fields should they proceed and what fields do they definitely not proceed in researching.
Well, did I understand you correctly? You said there's no evidence that it actually works?
You proved that there was nothing to prove, but not that it didn't exist.
Who said that? No, I didn't.
What he claims is that it's evident that there is something, but it doesn't make sense to keep it proving.
Yeah. In fact,
again and again and again.
Yeah, I would say there's a handful of traditional parapsychology experiments we should never do again. And Ray Hyman, one of the sharpest critics we have in our field, agrees with this. And there's a handful, we might argue which ones and so on, so I won't enumerate them here. The next step is to figure out how in the world does this stuff actually work. And there are all kinds of things that we're doing in the neuroscience world to look at what's happening in the brain. Other people, like in your lab and elsewhere, are looking at better defining some of the things for psychokinesis and the front end of things. It's a wide open study. The problem we have, and I believe I'm unique, please correct me on this if I'm not, there's only one person in our field historically that had a genuine career. What I mean by career, I had a 20-year career where I was paid industrial scale wages with retirement benefits and medical benefits, and I had no other job but psi research or psi activity. That's a career. I don't think there's anybody else in the field who can make that.
Dean, maybe?
Pardon me?
Dean?
No, gosh no.
Okay.
I'm not the length of time.
Neither me.
Yeah. So what, and that's not to brag at you. It saddens me because if you have a bunch of young students, I would definitely advise them, don't go into this field. You cannot make a living working in this field. And so I'm hoping that bright new people will say, well, wait a minute, let's go forward in some other directions. And I know you're working in that, others too, are trying to get this more identified in the, quote, mainstream scientific community. It's not the public. The public buys all this stuff, frankly, too much. But the mainstream scientific community, primarily psychologists, say no. Yeah.
Why were these programs important if some useful things came out of the military?
Would they do it again, you remember that?
Well, why these programs were aborted by the...
I don't know why the Russians were. I do know a lot why ours were. And it's written up extensively in this book, but I can just tell you. I had originally thought, when the CIA analyzed all our work, it was dreadful. They said, oh, well, it should be the academic community. It never really helped in remote viewing spying, blah, blah, blah. And I went to the fellow who wrote the foreword to this. It was then Senator William Cohen in the Senate. And I walked in the door, and he's waving that report around, and he says, can you rebuff this? I said, yes. So I wrote an article, and virtually everything I said in that article was wrong. What we found is, years later, that the director of intelligence in the CIA, the structure is, here's this director of central intelligence, and he has two deputies, one for intelligence and one for operations. The intelligence people are the analysts who figure out what's going on. And the director for intelligence said, no way in hell are we going to take this program when Stargate closed. We're not going to take it. Why? Because Congress was threatening to close the CIA. They were really angry at the CIA because they had all these memos from Congress written here. We're saying, you at the CIA are too thinly spread out your stuff. The money's going down, people are leaving. Please don't accept any more new programs. That's why they did. Now, Joe McMonagle and I spent a decade after our program closed to try to get something real started again quietly to do, because Alex wanted to have a joint program on counterterrorism. And I went to the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, said, hey, look, this guy wants to do a joint program, it's cheap. I could hear it going into the wastebasket before I exited his office. But we spent a decade to get things happening. Two things happened there. The working people who used this product loved it. They wanted to get something new going, especially counterterrorism. But it was killed at the upper level boardroom, so to speak. Really frustrating.
But you said the CIA was the funding agency?
It only funded...
was mainly DIA?
Yeah, it was mainly DIA and the Army Medical Research and Development Command. The CIA was 1% of our funding. But Congress ordered them to take the program, and they said, we're not taking it, so it closed. Now, why the Russians closed, I don't know. I'll ask Alex next time I see him.
I would like to make a remark that most people maybe that are reading the journal, our journal, know about this, but you are asking for an explanation of these phenomena. And of course, we have some theoretical.
Well, there are lots of theoretical.
We have about 4 or 5 serious theories around. And what's nice is that within next week, actually, that's also why he is here in Europe, we will have a workshop for the first time in the field of parapsychology, combining basically the theoretical people with the experimental people and forcing them to talk with each other. I mean, they have been combined.
Do we have to? Honestly,
and the reason and the way we do this is that at this workshop, the presentations are 50% of the time, and the remainder is discussion time. So we don't have this seating. We will be seated in a round, so we are facing each other, and that stimulates discussion. Because in the past we didn't have that. Let's say experimental outcomes did influence theories, nor did theories influence experimental approaches. And that's horrible because that's the basis of science. And I'm really happy that we have now for the first time this workshop where I think we will return with a number of many good ideas. Among those ideas, the answer to Marco's question, what are the most promising avenues to go? What kind of experiments will bring theories further, and what kind of theories will drive experimental research further? So there is hope. There's hope for the future.
I have a question. What was the decision on who gives presentations and who doesn't?
I think that the internal policies that you are asking for.
No, I mean, I was specifically told I couldn't present something, so I'm kind of curious why not.
You couldn't present something?
Yeah,
I have to.
No, I'm not presenting anything there.
Your multiphasic experiment?
No, no one told. In fact, I was explicitly forbidden by Mario. He said, you can't give a presentation. It's purely a discussion time. This was all brand new to me. I mean, I can talk all day long about it if you want me to present it.
There's a confusion there. You have 20 minutes presentation, 20 minutes.
You saw one of the things there is multiphasic model of precognition. I can summarize it.
No.
Sir, under the many explanations of this subject, is there also a stream explaining the thing out of the spiritual, out of the spirit side?
We have
spirits as real entities.
We have a presentation on 2 theoretical approaches that start from the, let's say, the mental experiences. This is the PMIR model, and
that is on the spiritual PMI or Stanford.
Well, it's starting from the mind's side.
So I'm talking about
and there are 3. Well, we don't have theories that are not refuted. And that's basically no theories that whatever you measure, it will always you cannot refute the theory. You understand? That's basically we willen verweerbare theorieën. We willen theorieën die door experimenten te verwerpen zijn. Geestentheorieën zijn dat per definitie niet. Dat is jammer, ze kunnen nog wel steeds.
Geestentheorieën kunnen wel worden bevestigd. Het gaat niet om de ontkenning van een theorie, het gaat om de bevestiging van een theorie.
Dat is een bepaald.
Ik denk dat het wetenschappelijk een onjuiste basis heeft.
There are 2 people in the U.S. who are deeply involved in both reincarnation research and in mediumship. Julie Bechel, I think it's the way she pronounces her name. She does magnificent work looking at certified mediums. I love her work. I'm on her science advisory board, even though I don't buy the story. She does really good work. The other one is the late Ian Stevenson in the U.S. He was a medical doctor who did virtually his entire career looking at reincarnation studies. And he published a monograph, which has been recently republished on Amazon, called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. I don't find that true. I read these 20 cases and said, we're done. These are really interesting. It requires some sort of explanation.
There will be a theory by Gertzel trying to explain that.
Yeah. What Stevenson said, when you have a set of data, you cannot focus on one cherished hypothesis. You have to have other hypotheses that might explain the same data. The modern language for that is called living agent psi, which means the individual had psychic ability to find out what the other person was, rather than having been reborn. And even Stevenson himself did not know how to resolve those two issues. So it's an open thing.
That's what I said.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you've done this work for 30, 40 years. What are your hypotheses?
My hypothesis?
Yeah, because you said it's difficult to explain, but you must have thought about it for so long.
Oh, sure, but not reincarnation.
No, I mean about this.
Yeah.
I'm at remote
We have a model that I'm now discovering I'm going to present in a few days in Paris that suggests the following. And it's a very unpopular model because I'm a lazy guy. And I'm lazy in the sense, if we don't have to invent something new, don't do it unless the old stuff doesn't have a hope of explaining it. All of our sensory apparatus that we're aware of are signal-based. You are hearing me because my vocal cords are shaking the air that go to your ears and so on. That's signaling. Same as sitting on the beach and watching the sun set or rise wherever you are. Those things are signal-based. So we said, okay, maybe psi is signal-based, and we have evidence to support that. I'll just describe it briefly. All of our known sensory systems are much better at detecting changes at their front ends than they are steady state. In fact, the visual system is even worse than that. You don't know your eyes are doing this all the time, and if you could stop your eyes from doing that, your experience would be total darkness. All right? So I said, well, if that's true, is there anything about psi that it works better when whatever that thing is changing compared to whenever that same thing is static? The answer is yes. We found it in 7 different experiments. The change of entropy, I'll explain what that is in a minute, of the target system correlates significantly, although weakly, with the quality of remote viewing, but the entropy itself does not. So the key take-home message of that is we found something, whatever it is, you don't need to know the details, that acts like a sensory system. In other words, size proportional to the thing changing compared to when the thing is not changing, like all the other sensory systems. So our model is based on signal. Now, that said, it's a hell of a problem to figure out how the hell, what's the carrier of a target being generated in India tomorrow? How does that get from there then to here now? Have not a real clue.
Now that was quite interesting, right? I mean, if stuff like that is declassified now, and we can only imagine what's going on right now, right? Anyway, join us again next week for episode 28, when there will be another edition of Evidence for Extraterrestrials.